Thank you, Faith. Thank you to IRD and Mark and Faith especially. I've known you for about a year now, and I've been in DC 12 years, and when I met you, I was really impressed with. I mean, you've been here a long time, but you have so much passion and enthusiasm. I didn't think people who have been in DC a long time still have that, and so it's like a shot in the arm for me to meet you. So thank you for this opportunity. I also wanted to point out a photo that I took, just to explain it. This is the wife of one of the 21 martyred Coptics who were beheaded in Libya, and their son. I got to meet them and film them about 6 months ago, and include them in a documentary that I'm working on. Everybody knows the image of the 22 men who were beheaded, and I like to show this image as maybe a more positive image of resilience, and meeting a lot of the family members of the Coptic martyrs. It really, they've really, I guess, taken this role of theirs, sort of a spiritual role, to heart. When I was interviewing one of the family members, they all have a little shrine in their home for their loved one who was beheaded, and they would have pilgrimages come there. And so we were filming an interview, and then we had to stop because they had about 10 or 12 people come in and just to pay respect, and it was a spiritual experience for the people that came there. It was very moving, and I think the more that we can do to get positive images out, to replace some of the images that ISIS has sort of left in our consciousness, I think that's very important. 4 or 5 years ago, I have a phone here. I don't know if it's yours. But, sorry. A few years ago, I had the opportunity, my first time going to Syria from Turkey, going over the border by foot at night to meet with Christians. And this is sort of before ISIS was something that was well known. But a friend and I, we were going there to meet with Christians, and obviously I was going to film and shoot photos and to write. And I remember getting there at night, and there's a sort of an abandoned building that we were in, and meeting with a few men who were part of a security force that would later sort of evolve into a militia a year or two later. And I remember sitting there and having one of the men look at us in the eye, and he had sort of a look of despair and frustration, a bit of confusion, but it wasn't a rhetorical question. He wanted an answer to it, and he asked us. He said, "Why don't Christians care?" And he talked about why don't Americans care? Why doesn't the West care? But really, that's what he meant, was why don't Christians care? And we didn't have an answer for him other than, well, most people don't know you exist. And obviously that motivated us to try to do something about it. But I knew something else that was a bit more hopeful was that I knew that if every American that I could bring and sit down in that chair at that moment in northeast Syria, in al-Malakiyah, if they were there with me, they would care. I was hopeful, and I was very optimistic about, if that were the case, then people would be activated and want to help. So the trick is, obviously that's not practical, but how do you bridge the divide between making people aware, but also making it a priority for Christians here? Now my background is interesting. Just in the last year, I've gotten to go to meet with Christians in a lot of different countries, like India and Sudan, South Sudan, and I was in Aleppo and Mosul in Egypt, and then also speaking with NGOs, and we had a screening at the British Parliament and at the government of Hungary and elsewhere just in the last year, but then going to places like Rockford, Illinois, and meeting with a couple hundred quote-unquote average people who are there as Christians to learn about the situation, or Wichita, Kansas. And it's interesting because everybody's reaction is different, and I think one thing that we could do maybe a little bit better job at is being a bit more savvy and strategic about how we present the problem to people. So I think, for example, there are a lot of Christians, and especially if you're in a position of power, that want to support, persecuted Christians in different places, but they also want to support all religious minorities. So it's important to, for example, include, if you're talking about persecuted Christians in Iraq, include Yazidis. That's very important. That might not be as important to the average Christian in, again, Wichita, Kansas, or anywhere in the U.S., but to somebody in a position of power, it's almost something they need to have to say, well, we have to use the right terms to communicate the persecution. Even appealing to national security interests, I think, is important. The fact that we can say, well, the more religiously diverse, pluralistic that a country is, if we can articulate that is going to also be a positive for our own national security, that is something that speaks to a lot of individuals. Even if they do care about persecuted Christians, this is sort of an added variable that they'll take into account to make it more of a priority. And also different denominations. I mean, Patriarch Afram from the Syriac Orthodox Church helped me to get to Aleppo, and he's been very supportive. But if you were here speaking to a bunch of evangelicals, they might not, he might not appeal to them as much as he might appeal to Orthodox believers or even Catholics. But if you want to tell a story, you want to talk about recent converts to Christianity from, for example, Islam or Hinduism in India or Islam in Egypt, that seems to really go a long way and really catch the attention of evangelicals more. And so I think just understanding who your audience is, and as a filmmaker, obviously, you're always interested in that and trying to make sure that, again, I think most people care about, once they're made aware, about those that are persecuted. But then I think the second issue is it a priority? And we only have so much time and resources. And so are we going to spend it helping the soup kitchen where I can go and actually provide a meal for somebody, give an hour of my time and I can see it. I can see the change that takes place. If you have, there's 1.5 million displaced Christians in Iraq and they speak a different language, they look different, they're a different denomination perhaps, and they're halfway across the world, and it's 1.5 million. What am I going to do? And so I think trying to speak to people through personal stories is very important. And I think that especially has an impact on sort of the average Christian, because whether it's a picture or a video, but I want to show a couple other photos as examples. I took this shot in West Aleppo, and I don't even know if the boy is Christian, although there are a lot of Christians in that area. But I think that it has an impact on people because, obviously, I don't have children, but if you do, then you see the look on the boy's face, and you see the pajamas, it's SpongeBob. I don't know what the words are, but it makes you think of your own children. And I think it's important, but then he's got all the rubble around him. And he ran out from his home, which was right nearby, because he knew there were people out there taking videos and photos. And so choosing imagery that really connects with whatever your audience is, I think is important to get them to think, this should be a priority to me, because now I feel a personal connection, especially in a film or in a documentary. And I've seen it, where I'll have a screening and somebody will come up and say, well, I want to help, but I want to help that person that I just saw in the film, or that group, or that institution that was behind helping that person. They want to help, give money to or pray for the persecuted church. That's definitely important. But when they feel a connection, maybe they see a child or I'm thinking of, a lot of you know Father Douglas Bozzi, who was in a documentary that I made a couple years ago, and he's so charismatic, and he was speaking in English, and he was very likable, and he came across with humor and humility, but also courage. And so many people say, well, that's the type of thing I want to support. That's what he's doing, him as an individual, but his projects are what I want to support, because they only saw an 8-minute clip of him in my documentary, but now they feel like he's a part of their life because they heard him. You know, it wasn't something that was written and read. And sometimes even when people come to a country, and I've seen him speak, and that's very powerful in front of you, that is very powerful, but when you see them in their own homeland, you know, around their family, around their friends, you see the challenges as well, as opposed to just hearing about it, but also you see the things that make you similar, which I think is often just as important. The same smaller challenges that we all face. Bedtime, as the boy runs around and is probably not wanting to go to bed. I mean, these are things that I think can connect us, because if it's a problem halfway across the world that seems very foreign and sort of exotic and just difficult to comprehend, I think we should sometimes focus on things that unite us, and even the little things in our daily lives, to make them seem like friends and family members almost, because then we'll say, okay, I will prioritize those individuals who now I feel a connection to. They're not just words on a paper, or they're not just numbers, as oftentimes we talk about you know, the persecuted with numbers. And a couple other quick photos. Here's a photo that I know IDC's used quite a bit. I shot of a friend's sister in Al-Qash, northern Iraq, a Syrian, Chaldean, Syriac, Christian city, village, ancient village. And if you ever go to northern Iraq, you have to go there, to Al-Qash. But I think what is so, and I've had people communicate this to me, is I didn't know, I have an image of what Christians might look like in a certain part of the world, and they didn't think negatively of that, but you're starting to break down stereotypes of what a person is, because they might have lighter hair or lighter eyes, or another photo. This is the mother of a Christian woman who was abducted by ISIS out of one of the Christian villages that surround Mosul. We interviewed her in Erbil, and as you can see, and I think a lot of people would assume, again, if they don't know a lot, if we're approaching people who aren't aware, that the mother might be Muslim because she has something on her head. But that's not always the case. So breaking down stereotypes, I think, is really important, so that people, when they see the news or they read stories, they're aware that, well, there are a lot of Christians there, even if they don't look like you and me. Her daughter has lighter hair and isn't wearing a head covering. And so I'd like to show a quick, before I finish, I'd like to show a quick, what we call a teaser. So it's actually even before a trailer for a documentary that I'm working on. This is a teaser for Christians in the Mirror is the name of the documentary. And it's through a group called Joshua Cord out of Tampa. And we're focusing on Christian persecution in 5 countries: Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Sudan, and India. And trying to unite people. We interviewed and spent time with, and we're telling personal stories of people across denominations. So we have 5 different denominations basically covered. And obviously there are different types of discrimination, persecution, genocide that they're facing, different colors, different genders, and reminding people that we're all one body in Christ, and that we need to obviously unite, but not think of things either in a denominational way or think that the problem is too far away to do something positive for them. So I'll show that short 3-minute trailer now.
يعني الأولاد عنا شافوا كل شيء، يعني عاشوا الحرب بكل تفاصيلها، عاشوا الخوف، عاشوا المعاناة. فيعني ما في داعي إنه نشرح لهم، صاروا هن شايفين كل شيء.
There is many of believers here, but they are still traumatized because what happened to them. The women, if she see her daughter to be raped, or men, he see her daughter to be raped in front of him.
أصلاً نحن كنا خايفين كتير من عندهم، لأنه كانوا بس بيجوا يؤذونا، وكانوا كتير إنه بياخدوا البنات، إنه بتعرفوا أنتوا بيروحوا ببيعوهم وبيتاجروا فيهم. فإنه إحنا كنا بخوف وما بنقدر نعمل شيء، ولا حدا قدر يعمل لنا شيء.
As American Christians, we enjoy freedom of religion, prosperity, and opportunity, while our brothers and sisters in Christ around the world face marginalization, persecution, and genocide. From Syria, Iraq, and Egypt to Sudan and India. Since the time of Christ, his followers in every corner of the earth have taken up the cross, bravely persevering and boldly proclaiming the good news of the gospel. And while they endure, we, living in freedom and affluence, have been given a responsibility. To whom much is given, much is expected.
We as Christians, the Bible says, we are one body. If there's any part of us is hurt, all the body, it will to feel the problems and the challenges. But these days, we forget each other. We are not praying for each other. We are not standing with each other.
الشعب كتير عن جد بحاجة لمساعدات، بحاجة لدعم، بحاجة إنه أي دعم، من كان دعم مادي، دعم معنوي.
मेरा विश्वास जब मेरे साथ ये हो रहा था, तो मेरा विश्वास परमेश्वर के ऊपर अटूट था कि प्रभु मरूंगा तो तेरे लिए, जीऊंगा तेरे लिए। अगर तुम अपने अक्षर कर्म दिखाना चाहते तो मुझे सुबह तक इसका निर्णय मिलना चाहिए, क्योंकि मैंने ऐसा कोई पाप नहीं किया।
We lost everything, but we have God. God is everything for us now.
Beyond denominations, across ethnicities, races, and nationalities, Christ unites us through the power of faith, the same faith that should inspire us to help those suffering from persecution.
أنا مسيحية.
مرد كرسي. أنا يونسولايا مشيحايا.
और मैं एक भारतीय मसीही हूँ।
أنا مسيحية.
Christians in the Mirror, a documentary about the courage and sacrifice of Christians around the world and the need to stand in solidarity with them.
We should be finished by the end of the summer, have a trailer for it, and then the actual film, a couple more trips still coming up. But the last 2 points I just wanted to make, I think we're doing better with regards to awareness. Obviously, most people still don't know about persecuted Christians, as we've heard. But also being ready to answer the question of why people should make it a priority is really important. And again, thinking strategically about, well, who I'm talking, know your audience, who am I talking to, what's going to appeal to them, telling personal stories, because it really appeals to the average person, but even members of Congress and other people in positions of power, they then take those stories that they see or they hear about, and then they're able to convey them to their constituents or other members of Congress. And I think that's what people remember more than anything else, are the personal stories. But lastly, I think, and we talked about it earlier, other speakers did, people sort of have this mentality of, well, what good can I do? Again, they can go down the street and help with the soup kitchen and see the help that they're giving and the impact that they're making. But I think 2 points need to be made. One is, if you're, oftentimes I remember being in Kabul, which is, it's in Syria and it's around Hasaka. When I was there, Hasaka was still partly controlled by ISIS, and Kabul is a Christian village, one of the Christian villages around Hasaka. And we were sort of getting a tour. This is 2015, summer 2015, and walking around, and people hadn't come back yet because it had been taken over by ISIS, but then retaken, and so it's sort of abandoned as they searched out the mines and ISIS was still relatively close, so it wasn't safe to return. But I remember, and this often happens when you travel, is you get to hear some diatribes from people about American politics. And so you tend to listen and probably agree with a lot of what they have to say. You might disagree with some of it. Some of it's sort of a lot of conspiracy theories and whatnot, but a lot of it is true, a lot of frustrations that people have. But it's funny, almost every time when I hear these sort of short speeches, at the end of it, they say, well, but we need your help. We still need your help as an individual, the church's help in the West, and the government's help. And so when we ask ourselves, well, what can we do? If let's say you're a Christian in a Christian town outside of Mosul, and ISIS is coming in the summer of 2014, for example, you look to the north as Turkey, you look to the west as Syria, you look to the east as Iran, you look to the south, doesn't get much better down there either, right? So, and they don't expect their government really to help them or to make them a priority. They know they're going to be the first victims and that they're not going to be protected. And then even after the trauma of something like ISIS, now that where the rebuilding starts to take place, they're not going to be a priority. And they have nowhere else to go. If you're a Shia Muslim outside of Mosul, Iran's there, you have the rest of the government, the rest of the country that is dominated by Shia Muslims, and it just tends to be more sort of tribal in that way. And so Christians will look and say, well, Europe, North America, they're sort of Christian, right? They're still Christian, or they have that background, so they'll help us. And then they look to us, and we say, well, we can't prioritize you. Or in some cases, we're going to actually, we don't want to look like we're supporting Christians, so we're going to actually, ignore you. And it's very frustrating, demoralizing for them to get that sort of feedback from our government and even from our churches sometimes. And so I think we can do a better job knowing that we're kind of the only hope that a lot of persecuted Christians have, and that they are looking to us. And finally, just to answer that question about what one person can do, I remember I used to do a lot of work in Cuba with political prisoners, and I was talking with a political prisoner who had come to Miami, and he was not well known. He wasn't somebody who had spent 10 years in prison, but he was sentenced to 20 years. He wasn't from Havana. He was from somewhere else on the island, and a small town, had taken a stand, for freedom and for the things that we hold to be important here in the United States. But when he was sentenced, and obviously Cuban prisons, it's not a great place to be, especially if you're a dissident, and he really lost hope. He had his family nearby who could visit him, for 2 hours every 6 weeks, but it's not a lot. And, his story wasn't well known. This is probably 8 or 10 years ago, so obviously, Facebook, the internet, social media had a presence at that point. And he was even thinking about suicide because of the state that he was in, and losing hope and feeling like he took a big risk and had the courage to do that, to stand up for freedom of religion and freedom of speech and whatnot. But something on the internet got out about his story, something very small, and people started to pray for him. And somehow that got to his family, and they relayed that to him, saying, well, there are people that know about the courage that you have and about your story, and they're praying for you. That's it. It was a few people. It wasn't a big campaign or anything. And he was telling me later in person after he'd been released, and he said, that made all the difference in the world. That, just it gave him something to think about every day, and to give him hope, and to sort of stand strong. And without that, he wouldn't have probably been there talking to me that day. And so something small like that, you don't know the positive impact that it can have. And so, I just encourage everybody to keep that in mind when you're talking with other individuals, or even thinking to yourself, how much good can I do? We'll probably never know, but there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of good that needs to be done. So thank you very much for your time.